Hi, everybody. The county board is now in session, and we are holding our budget work session today, a very different budget work session from any we've held before. Our manager is going to present a new drastically revised budget for the current circumstances. And then we'll see if we have some questions, but mostly this is to get out what our staff has been thinking and is recommending in these extraordinary times. And I don't expect it to bear much resemblance to the 400 and something page budget that you took months to prepare earlier when we actually knew our revenues and our expenditures. So, Mr. Schwartz, with that exciting introduction, can you take it away?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair and members of the board. And we are going to have a slide presentation here, which hopefully will be cued to what I'm talking about, because as you know, I do not have the remote control on the slides. We have all seen some extraordinary events over the last month and a half, and we've seen a personal toll that's been borne by countless Americans and Arlingtonians, a physical toll, a mental toll, and then also an economic toll. Both businesses and residents have been affected by this incredible change in circumstances. Our schools are closed and our revenues are very much affected, which is the reason why I'm back to you now with a newly revised proposed budget for fiscal 2021. And let me emphasize that, we can go to the next slide. Let me emphasize that this budget is really a guide for the initial months coming up of the fiscal year, and it's certain that we will have to revisit it as needed. And we do not have the kind of precise revenue information we had hoped for, and we will have more that will become known as months go by. So let's start with an update on the current fiscal year where we are. So the impacts we're certain to see most immediately are in those taxes that are listed here in the first bullet: sales tax, meals tax, and transient occupancy tax, among others. We have seen, for example, several hotels in the county have to close doors. Our room rates, vacancy rates are in the 90% vacancy rate area. Meals tax obviously is affected by the drop in dine-in restaurants, and though some of our business restaurants are doing as good as could be hoped for with delivery services, they're clearly hurting, and sales tax is also expected to be down. We also have a number of non-tax sources that are listed here: parking meters and parking ticket revenue, the fees that we anticipated from our parks programs, and also development fees that are related to the filing of site plans for consideration by the county. So that's the impact on revenues. What we've been doing, and I've talked to this briefly in some earlier presentations to the community, is we're instituting an immediate hiring slowdown. Now, that doesn't mean we're not hiring anybody, but our hiring is going to be focused on those very critical positions, for example, in public health or public safety. We have made use as needed, and I'll get into more details on this, the county manager contingent, which was appropriated as part of the fiscal 20 budget. And we will be able to make use of the stabilization reserve. I'll talk a little bit about that in a few minutes. We're also going to be deferring or canceling capital projects. And then I would like to note that we will be slowing discretionary spending. This means, for example, we do not have overtime costs on a lot of shifts that we used to have, because we have gone to a double or in some case triple shift system in some of our departments, which means that we're not not all employees are coming to work as they normally would, given that some of them have to telework and some do not have the ability to telework and have been taking what we call civil leave. So there's been a drop off in expenditures in certain departments. And so we will see evidence of that as we move through the rest of this fiscal year. While we've been in the process of preparing a new proposed budget, and we're actually, as I said before, in the middle of fiscal 20, We have made some initial investments to deal directly with the impact of the COVID-19 virus. We have purchased essential supplies, for example, PPE, which is personal protective equipment and cleaning supplies. We've provided additional PPE for our frontline employees and provided some to our nonprofit partners. We've invested in technology, essentially going to a virtual workforce, in most instances, standing up a new backbone for technology. And we have virtualized all our call centers, and we're able to do our emergency communication center call intake and dispatch virtually, as well as provide a number of Department of Human Services functions that previously had required in-person visits. As I mentioned in a previous board meeting, allocated an additional $100,000 to the Arlington Food Assistance Center. We have worked closely with Virginia Hospital Center to stand up a remote testing center on Quincy Street. We have just completed an agreement among Virginia Hospital Center, ourselves, and the Arlington Free Clinic to provide a high-speed fiber connection that will allow telehealth, which is essentially allowing the clinic to do work with the hospital directly without having to actually have in-person visits of physicians or handing off paper records. And then also we have identified certain hotel areas in the county that we're going to be using as backup housing for people who cannot stay in congregate care settings. Additional steps that we are planning, sometime this week I will be announcing premium pay for those frontline employees who cannot work remotely and are in a situation where they often have to come within 6 feet of the clients that they serve or the residents. We're also, and I want to discuss this a little bit later, we have a proposal that we're going to make to the board for small business support through a grant program, and then possibly discuss a revolving loan fund concept for small businesses at a later date. And also, I'm going to bring to you sometime this week a proposal that would slow down the required payments by some of the county's Affordable Housing Investment Fund loan recipients. I just wanted to note on all these initial investments, other than that $100,000, are all done within regularly appropriated funds within the departments. So I did not have the opportunity. Normally what happens is the county board provides me with budget guidance. You did that in November for a budget I proposed in February. Though I have had conversations with each of you, I have settled upon these 4 guiding principles about how I approach the revised budget. And you can see first and foremost would clearly be to make sure that we preserve and keep in place the funding for those immediate life safety services we provide to the community. For example, food, health, and housing. The second principle I've applied is to make sure we support the county workforce. Now, this has not been the universal approach among all jurisdictions in the United States facing this issue, but I feel very strongly I want to keep all our county employee positions intact and make sure that when we come out the other end that we have our infrastructure, our most important asset as a county, and in many ways is our staff, have them in place. So I'm not proposing any job cuts. The third area, and I've made reference to this in the previous slide, is to provide assistance to our business community and our nonprofits, many of whom are either hurting severely. Our businesses and our nonprofits have seen some very stressful times as we lean on them to provide more services to the community. And finally, and certainly not last but not least, is making sure that we have some flexibility as we go forward to address what is absolutely an uncertain future. So let's talk a little bit about the numbers. These are estimated changes in revenues below what it was that we estimated in February. So about 5 or 6 weeks ago, I think that was when we proposed the original budget. Since then, we've estimated an almost $56 million drop in revenues, mainly in two areas. One is the taxes that I have mentioned previously, sales, mails, and some smaller taxes like car rental, recordation fees, and also other non-tax sources that I mentioned previously. And you can see here, under the principles of revenue sharing, where each tax dollar that comes to us, the schools receive 47% of that dollar. Well, similarly, when we have revenue reductions, schools have to share in 47% of the tax revenue reduction. So you can see here that county taxes are down 24.4 and schools are down 21.6. If you actually, what happens if you add those both up, you come to about $46 million in tax revenues that have dropped. And that split there between the county and schools is based on the revenue sharing principles. Now, non-taxes, which I just described what they were, none of those are either shared with the schools, or in this case, which means the burden of that non-tax drop falls exclusively on the county side of the ledger. So that's a long way of saying, of that 56 million, the county now has a $34 million less than we assumed in February, and the schools have 21.6 million less than was assumed in the February budget. So a little bit more here about the impact on schools. You can see that with the reduction in this revised proposal, the schools still are receiving a slightly larger amount of money than what was included in the fiscal 20 adopted. But you can see it is that $21.6 million less than the original proposal in February. And I just walked you through the 47%. Now, we're working very closely with our school partners. They, just as we are, going through some very stressful times, and wanted to applaud them for the approach they're taking on virtual education. You will see that there are some unknowns, and these unknowns will also be on the county side. For example, the federal CARES legislation, the $2.2 trillion package that was passed by Congress and signed by the president about a week ago, does include additional funding for education. And there's the possibility that there may be some state support for education. At this point, it's far too early to estimate what, if any, benefit might come from those two sources. Again, I wanted to aggregate for you the totals here for taxes and non-taxes. We were just talking about the incremental changes. You can see here that for taxes in our revised proposal, this is across all sources, we are seeing a very, very slight increase, but we see a fairly pronounced decrease in non-taxes. So our fiscal 21 revised revenue estimates show that we're expecting to receive less revenue in fiscal 21 than we received in fiscal 20. And I can't recall in all my years in working on county budgets or other budgets where that situation has occurred, where one year was less than the year before. So this is a visual meant to show what it is that we're actually up against. If you can see, the two big mountains here are essentially the two large payments that we receive from residents and businesses for real estate and personal property taxes. And you can see that there's essentially the monthly payments from meals, sales, and transient occupancy tax and other taxes actually act as a bridge between those two large infusions of funds. And I don't know how well you can see the arrows here down below that show that the first real estate and personal property tax payment that we can expect after the board adopts this budget comes probably in about the June timeframe. And so once that happens, we have a period of time till October where the next payment comes along. So what we're seeing here is that in fiscal 20, where we are right now, we have received the vast majority of the revenue that we expect to receive. And for fiscal 21, when that year starts, we will have received the June payment. And so we will start off in a fairly good position. But quickly after that, there's a lapse of time where we will see some effects of those non-tax revenue sources that I described, and also some of the tax revenue sources. Let's go on to the next slide. I know we spent a lot of time just now talking about what it is we're not going to be able to do and what it is that we've lost by way of revenue, but we still have a lot, and I wanted to focus on that. We're going to have a county workforce with all the jobs in place, no changes to benefits. We're going to continue the investments that I laid out in the proposed budget in February, which included an increase in housing grants and funding for permanent supportive housing. And we will maintain the Affordable Housing Investment Fund at the adopted levels for fiscal 20. And then we're going to, as you can see, we maintain essential county services. One thing that's important to focus on with that is, even though we're able to maintain essential county services, we had, for the last 2 budget years in fiscal 19 and 20, we made cuts to a lot of county programs. I had hoped that fiscal 21 was going to be the year that we would have been able to address some of those pent-up demands for really very legitimate and needed investments in our community. We're not going to be able to do a lot of those, which is unfortunate. However, we're not going to have to, at least at this moment, cut essential county services. The changes we're making on the expense side, this is again changes from what was proposed in February. Even though we're maintaining all county positions, I think that it is called for in this circumstance to eliminate all compensation increases. So we had proposed salary increases somewhere between 3.25% and 6.5%, depending on the position. I'm proposing to eliminate those. And as I mentioned, we're slowing hiring. I also mentioned some exceptions here. We had programs that had received some very positive feedback for traffic control officers, expanding the library here and the Bosman Building, Courthouse Plaza, and some other programs. We're not going to be able to do those. And we also had hoped to add additional planners, an additional arborist, and also to expand some library collections and do some additional tree maintenance. I'm proposing that we freeze those proposals, and we're not going to be able to do them. And significantly, as I have mentioned, I think in a previous meeting, though we're going to continue with the construction of Longbridge Park and Aquatics Facility and with the Lubber Run Community Center, both of which are under contract and which the work continues on, I didn't think it was appropriate at this time to incur additional expense to open either of those facilities in fiscal 21. So I'm proposing we delay the openings to no earlier than July of 2021, which would be the beginning of fiscal 22. A couple of other things. We normally, in our rhythm here, our fiscal rhythm, we normally would go in around May or June to the financial markets to sell bonds. I am suggesting we not do that this year. We've had conversations with Arlington Public Schools, and for us on the county side, deferring a bond sale will not cause us a significant slowdown in any of the projects we have currently underway. And because of that, we'll be able to save some debt service, about $6 million worth of debt service. We also have the challenge of the Metro budget, which I'm happy to talk about at greater length. The Metro Board adopted a budget last week, which they have said they will revisit. So I have included the funding that I think appropriate there, and we can talk about that in greater detail. We will have a long list, which we will make available this week, of new projects that we had proposed for fiscal 21 that we're going to either cancel or defer. Some projects currently underway that we're going to hit the pause button on and redirect some of those funds towards filling this revenue shortfall that we have. Also, we have, thanks to the action of the board, in the last few years, set aside some additional money in a rainy day fund, or as we call the County Stabilization Fund. And I'm going to suggest that we tap a portion of that, though certainly not a significant portion of that, given that we will need to replenish that if we draw down. So there are things that I have made reference to some of these, and I wanted to spend a minute or two on these. And by the way, I know since we have a large number of people following this at home, that all this information is laid out in much more exacting detail in a memorandum I have sent to the board, and which has been posted on our website, which is 17 pages of single-spaced detail. So a lot, we're distilling a lot here. So what I've also done in this proposed revised budget is set aside essentially a contingent that is made up of $10.2 million. And I've split that contingent basically into two pieces. If you'll recall, when I proposed the budget in February, I had hoped to increase the amount of investment in the AHIF fund, the Affordable Housing Investment Fund, by $2.7 million. What I've done is I've taken that $2.7 million and said, rather than it going into AHIF, let's set it aside to deal with housing and safety net needs. For example, helping people to prevent evictions, potentially increasing housing grants given the greater need in our community, and then also help with food assistance for our community. I've made mention on the next bullet, you can see I've made mention to small business support. We have a small business grant program, which I've suggested to you, which may need additional funding beyond what I've proposed, and this would be the place to go and get it, which would be this contingent. And then also we need additional funds for employee programming, perhaps, whether it comes to mental health services and those kinds of needs. And then I will tell you, we started work on this revised budget about 14 days ago, and as each day has gone by, we continued our work based on a set of assumptions. I'd say the situation has deteriorated further in the economy, so this would be one place you could go to handle additional revenue shortfalls. What is it that we don't know? Well, we don't know that we know there's a chunk of money that was set aside in the CARES Act for local governments. And we know that the Commonwealth of Virginia has will receive a portion of that funding. We do not know how the Commonwealth is going to distribute those funds and on what basis. So this slide is showing where we might get additional funding in the future. So remember what I said earlier, the numbers I've laid out here in this proposal will have to be revised a number of times. And once we receive that information, and we hope to receive it before you move to adopt this budget at the end of this month, that will provide us additional relief, we hope. We do know that under the Community Development Block Grant Program, that Arlington County, due to the formula nature of the program, will be receiving approximately another $830,000. We do not know when that will arrive. And there's been a lot of conversation out there that some of the programs stood up by the CARES Act and the additional funding. It's taken quite a while, for example, for people to access the unemployment benefits and some of the small business benefits. So we will be relying on the efficiency of the federal government, and I will just let everybody evaluate whether they think that's something that we can rely on fully at the moment. And then also the potential for other state funding, though I think that the state will be under some of the same stresses that we are. So let's go on to I think the last slide, which lays out the schedule. We are here at April 6th. School board is going to propose its revised budget, the superintendent on April 16th. I'm proposing a work session on the 16th. And there are the dates of the required public hearings and potential county board adoption, and school board budget adoption, and then fiscal 21 begins in July. And two things to say in conclusion, and then I will, you don't have to hear my voice anymore. First is that we still are required under the Code of Virginia to adopt a budget that is balanced and is in place by July 1. And in order to have all our deliberations sync up with the required payments to us in June of real estate taxes, we essentially have to finish up very close to the end of April. There is not a lot of wiggle room there. I wish there had been, but there is not. And then in conclusion, what I did want to say is I wanted to thank very much our Department of Management and Finance staff that have been literally, this is no exaggeration, working for the last about 20 days. They've been pulling between 12 and 18-hour days and juggling a whole series of responsibilities. So I know I covered a lot, and there's a lot to unpack here. And so, but with that, I will conclude my presentation and turn it back to you, Madam Chair.